Chuck, what happened?
Well, it's complicated, and it goes to a number of things. First of all, we don't value resiliency, and we don't value reliability. Even in Texas, there's no state that I'm aware of that does that. What we do, and Texas is more of a free market state than any other place in the country, is we value electricity at a cost, the best cost, the best price. And so what happens is because wind and solar have a lot of subsidies, and they don't have any fuel costs, but they produce whenever they want to, they end up shipping power into the grid at a very low cost, sometimes a negative cost. Sometimes they'll pay the grid to take their power because the tax credits are worth enough that they can still make money even if they pay the grid to take the power. And what this has done in Texas is it's discouraged people from building new natural gas plants. It's encouraged the early decommissioning of coal-fired power plants. And so over the last 4 years, we've seen wind and solar more than double in Texas, and we've seen a loss of about 3,000 or 4,000 megawatts of thermal power. That's traditional coal and natural gas. And the problem with that is the grid is becoming less resilient, less reliable. So when you have a weather event like this that would, for example, in this case, freeze up some wind turbines. Now, we weren't really relying on them for that much power, but what little power we were expecting was more than cut in half. And then, because of the extreme cold, you started to have some issues with the grid itself insofar as its resiliency, and it knocked some power plants offline. It was a bad decision made to shut down the power to Midland, Texas, where Texas gets its natural gas, and so the flow of natural gas into those pipelines was significantly reduced, and then that made those pipelines freeze up or be more sluggish in their ability to deliver gas, because once you cut the flow, things are going to get a lot colder. And so then the natural gas power plants were starved of supply. And so what ended up happening is just a system-wide failure. Now, Larry, things are going to get a lot worse the more the grid relies on wind and solar, because those sources of power are not dispatchable. You can't count on them. We even have a little bit of battery supply in Texas, but the extreme cold cut the battery capacity by about 60%, because that's just the way batteries work. They don't work well when they get cold.
Mm-hmm. Chuck, couple things. What percentage of energy comes from wind and solar in Texas?
Well, it really depends on the day. If you look at installed capacity, which is not, of course, what it's making at any given time, as I recall, it's about 31,000 megawatts versus, over 70,000 megawatts from the thermal. So it's gotten to be a capacity of a little over 30% of our power. Now, on any given day, there's going to be a lot of fluctuation, right? It depends on how windy it is or whether it's a nice sunny day.
Now, Chuck, are you telling us that but for the movement to wind and solar, but for the fact that Texas relies on wind and solar for 30% of its energy, we would not be having blackouts?
No, there would probably be some problems, because this was the coldest weather to hit Texas in some 40-plus years. And cold weather just does terrible things. Like in my neighborhood, there were a lot of power lines that were damaged by ice. And they're physically damaged, right, because of the ice storm. So there would have been some problems. But here's the thing, Larry. We came very, very close to the entire state, or at least the portion of the state served by ERCOT, our grid manager, which is about 90% of the power in the state. We came very close to 90% of Texas having a complete and utter breakdown with no power whatsoever. And that issue was made worse by the shift to wind and solar, particularly wind in Texas. Wind is a bigger issue in Texas than it is in California. California is more of a solar power state.
Chuck, we're going to have to leave it there. So wind and solar, the move towards wind and solar has made things worse, not better.
Not better, not at all.
Chuck DeVore, VP, Texas Policy Public Foundation. As always, Chuck, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.